Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. If you've been watching my videos and reading my blog, you know that I've been showing you that U.S. summers have gotten much cooler over the last 80 to 90 years. But there's lots of stories in the press, like this one from Heidi Cullen's Climate Central, saying summers are getting much hotter. And they show maps like this painted bright red, which make it look like the U.S. is burning up. So what's going on here? The first thing to notice is this line right here, temperature trends since 1970. Why did Heidi Cullen pick 1970 for a start date? That's a known cold period, and we know that the 1930s were very hot. Let's take a closer look at what Climate Central did. This graph shows the average summer maximum temperature at all United States Historical Climatology Network stations. And what we see is that there's a very strong downwards trend since 1920. Temperatures have dropped more than 1 degree Fahrenheit during that time, and was very hot during the 1930s, and was very hot during the 1950s. Since about 1960, summer temperatures in the U.S. have been much cooler. Now let's look at where Climate Central started their bright red trend map, right here at a very cold period. Why didn't they start it back in the 1930s or 1920s? The map would have been blue rather than red had they done that to represent cooling temperatures. Another good indicator of summer heat is the frequency of hot days. In this graph, I show the average percent of summer days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit at all United States Historical Climatology Network stations. Once again, we see the same trend. The 1930s were very hot in the United States, the 1950s were very hot, and temperatures since 1960 have been much cooler. We've had a strong downward trend over the last 90 years. Now let's look again at where Climate Central started their trend map, right here at a very cold period. Had they started it earlier, the trend would have been downwards, and once again the map would have had to have been blue. What they're doing is extremely deceptive. What I've been showing you is very bad scientific malfeasance on Climate Central's part, but this story gets much worse. Let me explain. The graphs I've been showing you are the actual measured thermometer data from the United States Historical Climatology Network. They're represented by the blue line here and the dashed blue trend line. U.S. summers have been cooling over the last 95 years. But the data which Climate Central is using isn't the actual measured thermometer data shown in blue. They're using highly altered temperature data released by NOAA to the public, shown in red. NOAA has actually reversed the cooling trend and turned it into a warming trend. They've done this by massively cooling the past and massively warming the present. So Climate Central is not only cherry-picking their start date, but they're using fake data. Let's take a closer look at this. What they're doing gets even uglier now. This is the temperature data set which Climate Central is using, the massively altered temperature data from NOAA. Let's look again at where Climate Central cherry-picked their start date. They did it right here at a very cold point after 40 years of strong cooling. Most people have a very difficult time believing that scientists could be this dishonest and deceptive. But this sort of fraud seems to be standard operating procedure in much of the climate science community. Now let's take a closer look at the NOAA adjustments. What NOAA is doing to hack the U.S. temperature record is also extremely ugly. NOAA is massively cooling past U.S. temperatures by almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit and massively warming recent temperatures by an almost equal amount. This creates a completely fake upwards trend in a data set where the thermometers showed a downward trend since 1920. And once again, let's look at where Climate Central started their trend map. They did it right here at a point where NOAA had cooled U.S. temperatures by almost 2 degrees. So there's about 4 degrees of fake warming in their trend map. What we're seeing here is fraud, not science. Now let's look at what NOAA and Climate Central are hiding. The 1930s were extremely hot in the United States. During a 2-week period of July 1936, literally thousands of people died in the United States from heat prostration. There were periods of time when someone was dying every minute or two. Temperatures in Wisconsin approached 115 degrees that summer. The heat of the 1930s was completely unlike anything Americans have experienced in recent years, and Climate Central is intentionally hiding this from us. Texas and Oklahoma did have a very bad heat wave in 2011, but for the most part, summer temperatures in the United States have plummeted over the last 80 to 90 years. 10 years ago, Heidi Cullen from Climate Central called for any meteorologist who refused to go along with her scam to be decertified. Let's review what Climate Central is doing here. They're cherry picking their start date, they're using highly altered data, and they're trying to harass and intimidate other scientists into compliance with their fraud. The people behind the global warming scam are not good people. They're really just crooks. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.